What's up guys, Rob here, and welcome to the Newb DM. Today we're going to be talking about the Minotaur. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the Greek mythology of the Minotaur and how it compares to the Minotaur in Dungeons & Dragons. I want to take the Greek mythology and compare it to the D&D lore and see how the two differ and see how they're similar. Now, as a disclaimer, a lot of mythology is passed down initially through storytelling, through verbal communication, and isn't written down until later on. Also, after it's written down, a lot of the times it's converted from one language to another. Because of that, we get varying stories and different facts that may be a little bit different in one person's story versus another's. So that being said, how I tell the story may be a little bit different than how you know it, and if I come across points where I'm finding different facts in different locations, I'll try to point those out. With all that being said, let's get started. Now in D&D lore, the Minotaur is half bull, half human, with usually the head and sometimes the chest being the bull, and the rest of the body being that of a human. In Greek mythology, this is about the same thing. There are a few cases where it's actually reversed, where some people suspect they may have been talking about a bull body with a human head, but it seems like the typical, more commonly accepted form of the Minotaur is bull head, human body. Before we get into the actual story of the Minotaur, I want to start out by actually giving a few facts about the name Minotaur. Now, if we look at the actual name, Mino at the beginning of Minotaur is a reference to King Minos. Tor is a Latin-derived word meaning bull, or the bull of Minos. This is actually going to become very important later on. The second thing I want to point out is that Minotaur initially was a proper noun. Now, for those of you who may not have been in an English class in quite some time, a proper noun is actually a name. So it would be like Rob, Jim, Jeff. This changed in the 20th century, though, with the rise of the fantasy genre. So what we find is that Greek mythology typically only had one Minotaur, while when we get into later years in the fantasy genre, it became a species as a whole. So the name Minotaur went from being a proper noun, the name of one, to a common noun, a name of a group. So now let's talk about the creation of the Minotaur, and we have to begin with none other than the king of Crete, King Minos. So this is one of the first points where there are conflicting stories. They all have the same basic premise, but they're just little details that are different depending on the source you look at. Some sources say that it happened during his rule as king. Others say it happened before his rule as king as a means of promoting him as the true ruler of the land. The basic premise, though, is that King Minos prayed to the god Poseidon for some kind of sign proving that he was the true ruler of the land. Poseidon responded to Minos, saying that he'll send an incredibly beautiful bull to him to prove that he is the true king of Crete, but in return, Minos has to sacrifice this bull to Poseidon. So Minos went to his people, and he prayed to Poseidon, asking for a bull to show that he is the true king of Crete. And sure enough, Poseidon sent that bull. So there are a few conflicting stories at this point, but the general premise is that this was an incredibly beautiful, solid white bull, and Minos saw it as being too beautiful to sacrifice. So he thought that Poseidon wouldn't mind if he sacrificed just another one of his bulls in his herd. Well, Poseidon wasn't too happy about this, and decided to take his anger out on Minos. Unfortunately, this anger was taken out through Minos' wife, Pasiphae. Pasiphae? Pacify? Pasiphae? I have heard so many different pronunciations of this name, honestly, I can't tell you how to say it. I'm just going to call her Pasiphae. I'm pretty sure that's not the right one, but whatever, that's what I like. The point is, unfortunately for Pasiphae, Poseidon made her fall in love with this bull, now being called the Cretan bull. Now, this is the point of the story where it stops being PG. So, being tranced by Poseidon, Pasiphae decided that she wanted to have a child with the bull. So she approached Daedalus, who in Greek mythology is known as being a very creative and a very skilled inventor. Now, it's up in the air on how Pasiphae convinced Daedalus to do this, but he ended up making a more or less a hollowed out cow statue, and they placed it inside of a meadow that the Cretan bull was known to graze in. Now, Pasiphae climbed inside of this cow, and when the Cretan bull got there, they spent some time together. So I have to tell you about a little fact that I had to look up. So everywhere was saying, oh, and 9 months later, Pasiphae had a baby. But I got to thinking, this child is half human, half bull, so would it have a longer or shorter gestation period because of, the different species? Turns out, gestation period of a cow, very similar to humans. Either way, about 9 months later, Pasiphae had a child that was half bull, half human. Pasiphae named this child Asterion after King Minos' stepfather, but everyone on the Isle of Crete pretty much knew it by the name Minotaur. As a side note, King Minos and his stepfather Asterion also have some interactions with a bull. Seems it runs in the family. Again, we reach another point where the stories seem to differ depending on your source. Some say it's due to the fact that it's a union between a human and an animal. Others say it's because Minos more or less enslaved and tortured it. What is agreed upon, though, is that Minotaur was very, very aggressive and monstrous. Pasiphae tried to nourish and care for this animal, but after a while realized that it just wasn't going to happen. Minos at this point was very angry, and he ended up going to the Oracle at Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi ended up telling him to build a giant maze under the Isle of Crete and to put the Minotaur under here. So Minos went home and he found Daedalus and he forced Daedalus to build this giant maze, which became known as the Labyrinth. Now once this maze was complete, the Minotaur was placed inside of it. Now it's hard to say whether it happened before or after it was put inside of the Labyrinth, but at some point, the Minotaur became so ferocious and monstrous that really the only food it began to eat was human flesh. So we now know how the Minotaur was born and how it came to be in the Labyrinth. So to switch gears for just a moment, we need to talk about Minotaur's half-brother, Androgeus. Now there's a lot of speculation on how it actually happened, but the main premise is that Athens either directly or indirectly caused the death of Minotaur's half-brother, Minos' own son, Androgeus. Now Minos was obviously not happy about this. Some say that Minos threatened the king of Athens, others say the gods intervened, but regardless, Athens ended up having to send tributes over to Crete. Some say on a yearly basis, but there are other sources that say every 7 years, and some say every 9 years. Now, these tributes consisted of 7 virgin males and 7 virgin females, and they would be placed inside of the labyrinth. Now, the agreement was if the tributes could defeat the Minotaur and escape the labyrinth, they would be sent back home. Otherwise, they would be eaten. As you can guess, nobody really survived. The Minotaur ended up killing all the tributes that were sent in and ate all of them. That is, until Theseus volunteered. Theseus was known as being a very powerful hero, and when he found out about the Minotaur and it came up time for the tributes, he volunteered to go take on the Labyrinth and the Minotaur. Now, Theseus has plenty of stories, but we're not really going to get into him right now. Now, how they met and how they fell in love is up in the air, but King Minos' daughter, Ariadne, ended up falling in love with Theseus. Obviously, because she was in love with Theseus, Ariadne approached Daedalus, asking for him to help her find a way to make sure that Theseus was able to survive the Minotaur and escape the labyrinth. Daedalus told Ariadne to give Theseus a ball of yarn, and at the beginning or the entrance of the labyrinth, he should tie off the very beginning of the yarn, and to unravel the yarn as he traveled through the labyrinth. That way, once he defeated the Minotaur, he can just follow the yarn back to the entrance. Some say that Theseus used the Sword of Aegis to defeat the Minotaur, while others say that he actually cut off the horn of the Minotaur and stabbed it with his own horn. But the point of it is, Theseus ended up killing the Minotaur. Theseus followed the yarn back to the entrance, and that's the fall of the Minotaur. So let's compare the Greek mythology Minotaur to the D&D and other tabletop role-playing games Minotaur. As I stated earlier, one of the key facts is in Greek mythology, Minotaur was one creature. Its name was Minotaur. While in the tabletop games, Minotaur are actually a species. The other major difference that I'm noticing is that while in the Greek mythology, the Minotaur was very savage and ferocious and aggressive and just more or less a monster, in the D&D world, while they are very aggressive and strength-based society, they do live off of a code of honor. What I do find really interesting is that in the world of D&D, the Minotaur are known as being very competent when it comes to sailing and being on the water and being on ships. I'm going to give Dungeons & Dragons the benefit of the doubt and say that they gave the Minotaur this trait because the Bowl of Crete was given to Minos by Poseidon, the god of the ocean. Now, Minotaurs have been in Dungeons & Dragons for many, many years. The Minotaur made their first appearance in D&D in 1974 in the release of the White Box, and has been pretty much in every single different iteration of D&D since then. In fact, in quite a few of these different editions, the Minotaur were actually made into a playable race. I personally feel like, for the most part, D&D has kept pretty true between the Greek mythology of the Minotaur and the lore of the D&D universe. Now, personally, Minotaur are one of my favorite creatures to use in D&D. Unfortunately, in my current campaign, I haven't really been able to use them that much. They don't quite fit into the story, at least not yet. I have been able to let my players fight a skeletal Minotaur, and that battle was actually pretty fun. It was actually a skeletal Minotaur riding on top of a skeletal warhorse. Nearly took out one of our sorcerers in one hit. It was great. The point is, I love Minotaur, and I hope you do too. I hope you've learned something from this video, and I hope it helps you in your later campaigns when you maybe are able to use some of this knowledge to incorporate into your story. Follow me on Twitter at the Newb DM. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, have fun.